Okay, so let me get started. I see a lot of people who I can't explain anything anymore, I think, about this subject, but I didn't get any concrete questions anyway, so I'm gonna go through what I wanted to do, and you can interrupt and ask questions. So housekeeping, this is not a webinar like the one I did yesterday. It felt very weird to do this virtual Safari yesterday because no one spoke up during the presentation. So here you can unmute yourself if you want, and interrupt and ask questions or clarifications. I'm absolutely fine with that. I need to see if I can bring up the chat window in a second as well, but I will share my screen with you first. Share, yes, desktop 1. I only have one there. And now I need to also find the chat window. Yes, okay. So you should be able to see a bunch of penguins, including one on a postcard, if everything goes well. So what we did, I think a week ago, we talked about variables, and I have the stuff that we talked about then here as well. So we talked about building a check where ultimately in Switch, you could have one profile, and depending on a product, for example, the check could check for different resolutions. So basically a check with a variable inside. And what we talked about then is simple variables. That's the stuff that you see here. And I explained that you can see that they are variables because they have these angled brackets around them. And you can use them in properties of the check, you can use them in the name of a check, and you can use them in a profile to switch something on or off. So that's all the stuff that we covered yesterday, or no, not yesterday, last week. This is stuff that already existed in pdfToolbox 5, I think, so it's been in there quite a long time already. It's also limited because these are variables that you set from the outside, which means that you need a platform like Switch, or you need scripting support around pdfToolbox in order to input what you want to use in a profile. And you can't do things like calculations and so on. And at some point, we had enough support questions to try and change that. And I made a request, a feature request, that said that would be cool if we could at least calculate with variables. And Callas was very amused. And what they implemented was not something where you could calculate, but they implemented JavaScript variables, which at first seemed kind of complex, and you kind of think that no one's going to use a lot of that. And meanwhile, it turns out that people do all kinds of horrible things with JavaScript variables. So let me explain how that works. And I will begin by saying that it is very similar to what we've seen the last time. I said last time that simple variables are separate objects, so they live in the library. So if I go to manage libraries here and I go to variables, then you see a list of the variables that are available in this library. All of them have these angled brackets around them. So they're all simple variables in this particular case. But JavaScript variables are very, very similar. They are the same object type. Internally, they just function differently. And what does that mean? Well, I have prepared a little fix-up here. This is a fix-up that adds a QR code. So if I run that, And pdfToolbox wants to play. There we go. So if I run that, it adds a QR code in a location on this card. I've added it in magenta because it's a nice color. Well, it shows up at least. And I put a value in there, and the value is 4-piece cafe. So the first thing that I could do, of course, is what we did last week, and I could make a new variable from this and say QR code value, and then the variable name, the symbolic name, is going to be var QR code. And there. So now I no longer have a text. I have this indication again for a variable. And when I look at the fix-up icon, there are these little black dots that signify that this thing now contains a variable. And if I run that now, instead of just, there we go again. I don't know why this crashes every time I try to do something in a 4-piece cafe, but so far it's been pretty consistent. So that's not so good. There, let me do this again. Yes, yes, I know it crashed. Thank you. So where is my PDF document? Here. And now this bloody Zoom thing is in the way. Here we go. So let's try that once more. Yeah, so what it does when I run it now is that it asks me for the value that I want. And of course, if I now change that, it is going to put a different value in that QR code that is going to be added. So that is what we saw last time. And then I also showed how you can use that in Switch and how we could send a value from Switch into this variable, and that is then going to be used as the value for the fix-up. Now it takes even longer. Yes, thank you. So different value in the barcode, and if someone has a phone and wants to check that, then you can validate what I've been doing here, but I think it's correct. So now there are a few cases, and this is when the discussion for JavaScript support or something started. There are a few cases where what I just did is really not good enough. What I want to add, it is inconvenient that I have to add something from the outside to this. Yeah. Let's assume that what I want to add in this QR code is, and this is something that you will see often in things like proof sheets and so on, that the value that I want to add is the name of the document itself. Yeah, then it's annoying that I would have to look up the name first in Switch or in scripting, and then I have to pass it in. It would be neater in a way if I could collect the name of the document right here and then add it as the value for the QR code. And that was one of the original forms of the feature request. And the answer was, well, what if we, instead of creating simple variables, what if we create script variables that can calculate something themselves? So what is a script variable? Well, it is a variable, and it's a little bit confusing here because it says new variable, new script, but both will actually bring up the same dialog window. So if I choose new variable, I get the UI that we used last week for these simple variables. But if I now switch to scripts, then I have the UI that I need to create a new JavaScript variable. So it is very, very similar. And the script variable also has a name. Now, the name of the script variable is typically not used outside of pdfToolbox. For a simple variable, if you want to pass something into it, then you need to know that name on the switch side. That's what we did last week. For a script variable, that's not the case. A script does its own calculation. So it only exists within the context of pdfToolbox. So the only importance for the name is that A, it should be unique, and B, it should be understandable to you, so that if you look at the list of variables, you understand what does what. Now, what I want to do here is create a script variable that collects the name of the document. So I can say something like script document name. The convention I follow is that all simple variables start with var. Script variables typically start with script. That's kind of logical. The label value is completely useless. Well, completely useless, is not used very much either. So we could use this to further clarify what we are doing here, but that's about the only significance there is. And then there is a JavaScript that I have to enter. Now, JavaScript comes in many different forms, and this is actually a valid JavaScript. What you have to write here is a number of statements, one or more statements, and those statements have to generate a result. And when I write 5 with a semicolon, even without the semicolon, the result of that is a text, a string, with the value 5. So this is actually a valid JavaScript that will return 5. And I can switch on evaluation results, and then it will show me that, yes, the result of this statement is 5. Of course, I don't like just returning 5. It should be something with penguins, so we'll change it to that. But this is a valid JavaScript. And if I go and close everything now, I still have the 3 black dots there because this thing does use a variable. But now I have the name of the variable here. I have no default value because a script variable doesn't have a default value. And you can see that there are not these angular brackets, but you have parentheses around them. So there is, it looks different because this is a script variable. Does it still work? Well, if I run this, and if it doesn't crash, then you'll see that it still adds a barcode. The value of this barcode will be the value of the script variable that I have inside. And, so that's the penguins. And remark that pdfToolbox didn't ask me anything. What it did before was it brought up this variable dialog where I could say, this is the value that I want, and I could change that value. For a script variable, it is not going to ask me that. Why? Because the script variable does its own calculation, so it doesn't need to be fed from the outside. Yeah? So it just does the job. It doesn't bring up that ask at runtime dialog, and I end up with a QR code. Now, this is cool because now I can do calculations. But by itself, we're still missing something. And what you're missing here is exactly the same as what you would be missing in a browser and on a website environment if you were to use JavaScript there without doing anything special. Having JavaScript by itself is, I shouldn't do new script, I should do edit if we want to go back there. Having JavaScript by itself is cool because it lets me calculate. But it only becomes really cool if you can connect to the environment in which this JavaScript is running. And if you've ever written JavaScript for a browser, the way that happens is because you, for example, have a window object, and that window represents the window that your website is running in. And that window object has properties that you can ask or set and modify, and you can start looking at the HTML in there and modify that and so on. So it only becomes powerful in a browser when you can connect to the environment of the browser and start interacting with that. And that is the same in pdfToolbox. Having JavaScript by itself is cool, but it becomes powerful because there is a link to the pdfToolbox environment where this is running. And that link, you can either go look at the documentation if you want, or you can click on this little information button. You have to do that while you are inside of this edit field. If you are outside of the edit field, well, I was already in there, so yeah, when you do it outside of the edit field, then the last three options will be grayed out. And then you can lose half an hour of your life trying to figure out why it doesn't work. You have to make sure you're editing this JavaScript, and then they will become active. And these first two, but specifically the one here, insert JavaScript objects, that represents or documents the link with the pdfToolbox environment that this JavaScript is running in. Yeah. Why? Well, when I open this, you'll see a long list of JavaScript objects that you can use in your JavaScript. You don't have to use them from here. I could just type app.doc, and that would, in my script here, and that would give me the current document that is being processed. Yeah. The only reason this dialog box is here is so that you don't have to go to the documentation site every time and look up what that was. I can just go here and look for what I need. So if I'm interested in the file name of this document, I have something called app.doc.document file name. And I can insert that into my script. So let's say goodbye to the penguins, and I can replace it with this. Yeah. As I said before, no need to take it out. There is no magic here. I can just do exactly the same thing while typing it in if I remember what it is, and that will work just as fine. Yeah. So the main object that does this, that makes this connection, is the app object. And app represents pdfToolbox, the application that the JavaScript is running inside of. And then you have, as you've already seen, we have app.doc, which is everything to do with the current document. There is app.env, which has to do with the current environment, things like the language that is selected and the license information, but also the operating system that we're running on, the platform that we're running on, all of those things. And there is now also something called app.http, which helps you by doing, for example, REST API calls. And then there are a few others that have been added over time as well. But the main object is this app and app.doc object. Now, what does this do? Well, like I said, it makes the connection between these two, and that connection is bidirectional. And what I mean with that is that I can read things from the document, such as the file name that I'm working with. And you can already see that here, the result window tells me that the result of the script is going to be the file name of the document. And actually, if I change this to another document, it will show me again what the result is going to be for that document. Yeah. So that's in one direction. That is information that lives in the document or in the application and that I pull into my script. I can also do things in the other direction, as we will see a little bit later as well. So I can modify the environment to some extent as well. Not for all properties. Document file name, for example, is read only. So I can get the name of the document, but I cannot modify it by simply modifying appdoc file name. So what I can't do is say penguins.pdf. That's, I'm not going to get an error here, but when I run this, the JavaScript interpreter is going to either simply ignore what I'm doing here, or it's going to give me a runtime error and say, this is read-only, I can't modify that. Yeah. But there are some other cases where from within a script, we can modify what is happening later. Okay. And I'll give you an example of that a little bit later as well. So let's see what happens with this. Let's close this. And I still have a fix-up. And let me run. And now, instead of adding penguins to it, or whatever the fixed string was we had before, while running this, pdfToolbox is going to query what that app.doc.document file name variable is. And then it's going to use that. So in this case, script document name, the value of that is halloween.pdf because that's the name of the document we're processing. Yeah. This is the essence of what happens in JavaScript variables inside of pdfToolbox. You can use them anywhere where you have a simple variable, but instead of getting a value from the outside and letting you modify what a fix-up does in that way, in this case, it is getting a variable from the inside, if you want. It calculates a value that is then used in a fix or a check. It is not more complex than that. Any questions so far?
Yes, can script share values?
Aha, very good question. The short answer is yes. Yeah, and it is actually kind of the next thing that I had to explain, but I'll try to visualize what happens, and we are going to do this by using this profile that I built last time. So I have a profile here, check resolution. I have not tried this ahead of time, so I might need 2 tries to make it work. We'll see. I have a check in here, or at least 2 different checks. And one of these checks uses a variable, a simple variable. And the variable is called var resolution. Yeah? What happens when I run this? pdfToolbox asks me, what is the resolution that you want to use to do the check? And that's because it's a simple variable, so it allows me to fill it in. As you can see, there is one other variable in there that controls the fix-up, the bleed creation fix-up that is in here as well. And that is because on the fix-up side, we have a variable here at the bottom, toggle create bleed. Yeah? So we have 2 variables in this profile that are run. Now, a simple variable from the outside, or let me rephrase that, a simple variable expects a value from the outside. Now, could I in some way pass something to this variable myself instead of asking the user to do this? Which comes back to your question, Stefan. Can I modify something somewhere and pass that information to the check that is going to run afterwards? Yeah. And like I said, the answer is yes. And the key to this is an object that lives under this app object. And in order to show that, hopefully, I'll show you that a profile has a startup script. This was added in pdfToolbox 9 or 10, I don't remember. The startup script is a JavaScript. It's a JavaScript variable if you want, but it is one that is going to run as the first action when you execute this profile. So whenever this profile is run, the first thing that happens is that this script is executed. Now, I don't have a script at the moment, so I can create a new one. And we'll say script profile startup. We'll give that a little bit of an explanation. Notice that in my result window, it says undefined. Undefined is something that is very well defined in JavaScript. It means basically, I don't know, not set. I don't know. It has not been set. So the result of my script at the moment is undefined. And again, I could put something else in there and then it would give me the result. Now, for a startup script, the result is not really that interesting. What is interesting is what you do in the script itself. And I'm going to show that I have a good memory, and then I'll show you a trick in order for you not to have a good memory. So what I'm going to do is app.vars.var resolution, and I'm going to set that to 555. Yes? This app object, as I said before, is the connection with pdfToolbox. The vars object is an area that lives in that app object and where I can create variables, but also where all the variables that are created, all the simple variables, for example, that are created and that exist, they get their place as well. They are stored there. And this app.vars area is an area that is bidirectional. I can read the value of other variables, but I can also write to them. I can set them. Yeah. So if I say app.vars.var resolution is 555, what I'm actually telling pdfToolbox is I'm declaring a simple variable called var resolution, and I'm giving it the value 555. Please remember that. That's what I'm telling pdfToolbox. And now, because I'm nice, I'm also going to tell pdfToolbox that my startup script was successful. And I could return 1 or true or anything, but that way, at least pdfToolbox knows that everything went the way I thought it should go. So there is a script in there now. And this doesn't change very much from the outside to this profile. There are variables in there, they're still there. But let's see what happens when I run this. Yeah. Instead of now getting the question what the resolution should be, I now only get the question whether I want to add bleed or not. Why is that? There are 2 variables in that profile. So normally I should be asked both. Well, the reason for that is, of course, is that the var resolution was set in that startup script. And once pdfToolbox has a value for a simple variable, it's not going to ask the user for it anymore. Yeah. So if you add simple variables to a profile, you can add as many as you want. Normally, pdfToolbox is going to ask you, what are the values that you want to use? But if you also have script variables inside of there, then it's not going to ask you if the script variable already sets that value for the variable. So var resolution was set and I was not asked what I wanted, but toggle create bleed was not set in my startup script, so that it asked me. Yeah. And you can also see script profile startup and the value that I returned there, 1 or true. Yeah. So this return value is not used by pdfToolbox, but it is visible always under this variables item. So it can be useful to either return false or true, depending on how your script goes. At least you can then see if there was a problem in the results.
Does it have to be Boolean? Or can you write success or congratulation or?
You can as well. Yeah, it doesn't matter in this particular case. Yeah. To me, it feels logical to return a Boolean, but if you would want to return success from it, it would work as well. And this is very JavaScript-ish. JavaScript is a very, very free language. So if you return the string success and it expects a Boolean, then it's going to assume it's true. If you return the string error and it expects a Boolean, it's also going to assume it's true. So you have to be a little bit careful with what you do there. But for me, the most logical thing is to return either true or false. Now, let me show you that you don't have to remember what these names of the variables are, and you can get some help there. And that is because in this area that we've discussed, I said insert JavaScript objects. Yeah, in there is something that is called app.vars. So that should be in there somewhere. Is it not? There. Yes, so, and it says return the objects, so it returns all the variables that are in the current context, and then returns the value of the variable var key, where that is the name. So it does show you that this thing exists, but that's not very helpful because you still have to remember what the actual name of the variable is. And as we get older, our memory gets worse, so that's not good. So what you can also do is you can do insert variables. And insert variables shows you a list of all the variables in the current library that exist. Yeah, so I could say toggle create bleed. That was the other one in this particular profile. And now when I do insert, it adds app.vars.toggle create bleed, and I can decide what the value should be. Now, in this case, it has to be a Boolean because this is a variable that is used to switch on or off a particular fix, and that has to be a Boolean. So when I set this to 0, the fix is not going to be executed. No, I want to run tests. So when I test it now, it tells me that it has run the resolution check with a value of 555, which is what we set in the initial script. And then because toggle create bleed was set to 0 in the initial script, it has not done the fix-up. Yeah. And Stefan, to come back to your question, this context, this execution context, or let me phrase it the other way, everything that lives in app.vars will continue to exist as long as the profile or process plan is running. Yeah? This also works in a process plan. So if in the first step of a process plan, I set a variable like app.vars.arrowMessage equals something, I could use that variable, app.vars.arrowMessage, in step number 5, step number 7 of the process plan. That area remains in existence throughout the whole execution, and at any time I can read from it or write to it.
David, may I add to that?
Absolutely.
It's also important to mention that the type of variable is also preserved. So when you define something as string, then it keeps being string, except when you convert it to a different type.
Yes.
What you have to make the only thing you have to consider is when you pass a variable using the command line tool, everything is passed as string. So when you want to work with a value and do calculation, you have to make sure to convert the string first to an integer or float, and then work with that. But from one process step to the next step, the type of the variable is kept later on.
Yeah, and when Peter says command line, also think switch. Yeah, so if you pass stuff from switch, it actually passes over the command line, which means that even if you have a number in switch that you pass this way into a profile, by the time it ends up in your JavaScript here, it will be encoded as a string. Yeah? And if you want to calculate with it, you have to convert it. And annoyingly, sometimes JavaScript will do the conversion automatically for you if you write the correct statement, and sometimes it will not. So the best thing is to realize that you want a number and to explicitly convert it to a number when you want to use it.
So do these variables, are they only valid for one document while the profile or the
yes.
plan executes it?
Yes, execution context. Yeah. So in Switch, for example, an execution context means that a document arrives in the configurator for pdfToolbox. That triggers an execution of the command line pdfToolbox version in the background, and the execution context stops when that is done. Yeah. There is no official way to persist anything across multiple execution contexts. Yeah, so in Switch, there is a concept of global data where you can store something and read it again later. That does not exist in pdfToolbox. You would have to come up with something like that yourself. It can be done. Well, actually, it's not that easy because you can't write files that easily. But that
write an
concept
API.
doesn't exist.
You could call a REST API that you wrote to store values.
Yeah.
David, I had a question. Is there a way to have a library of JavaScript functions that could be easily referred to, like a startup library?
Yeah, so I will give an answer, and then perhaps Peter wants to complete or wants to add to that, because I know he has a solution or has thought of a solution, but I'll give the official statement. No. So there is no built-in mechanism where you can include or require JavaScript modules as you can do in Node.js, for example, and put that. So no official mechanism.
And the unofficial method to do is you can store a JavaScript at some location, which you can load and then perform an eval on that.
Yeah.
Then you can access the functions that are defined inside, but you cannot require any libraries dynamically. You have to have everything available, loaded in a variable, or loaded in a variable, and then eval the variable.
I thought David said you didn't have access to files.
You can read files, you cannot write files.
Ah, okay.
Yes. Yeah, so one of the ones I skipped over here is if I go back to my script environment and I show you JavaScript ops. So you have the HTTP to do REST calls, but then there is also file and XML. So you can read from files, and I actually also have examples where I read JSON files to get stuff in, because it's very often it's easier to have only one variable, and that variable is a path to a JSON file, and everything else lives in the JSON file. That you can do, but you cannot write. The reason you cannot write is because that would constitute a security problem or a potential security problem.
I have one more question. So we've looked at how to use JavaScript to calculate the value of a variable.
Mm-hmm.
How about more from the entire file processing? Like if I wanted to iterate over all the pages and do something to every page, is there ways to do loops? And
first of all, this is yes and no. You're touching on something that is a serious limitation, and there is a feature request for it, but it is not that easy to solve. So first of all, what you're dealing with here is plain JavaScript. You can do whatever you want. This is the Google V8, I think, JavaScript engine that is running here. So any modern type of JavaScript will work here. So can you do loops and stuff? Yes, of course. But more importantly, could I loop over all pages and do something? Not really. What you can do is you have some information about things, and some of that information is different for different pages. For example, if I want to look at the trim box, for example, then there is something called app.doc pages, and then the I has to be replaced by the number of the page, 0 based, obviously. And that will give me access to all the different trim boxes of all the different pages. Yeah. So there, yes, you have access to that specific information for all of these different pages. That doesn't mean that you can easily loop over them and do something with it. You can calculate something based on that and then return that or set it as a variable, but there is no way to easily create a loop that will, where things will be called on every page. Now, you can do what you want by being clever in a process plan. So you can make a process plan that does a loop and that uses a page number, current page number, as a variable. If in the beginning of my process plan, I say page number is 0, and then I continue, and I have some stuff that uses this variable on the page that we're now at. And then I have a step that increments it and checks whether the document is now all processed and so on. And so that can be done. It's in general, it's not a very good idea from a performance point of view, at least not in my experience.
I'll give you a use case. I mean, this is something we've looked at doing before. Adobe has got a Photoshop API now that's on the web. It's a REST API that is implementing some pretty neat technology for images. And so imagine that I want to iterate over all the images in a PDF, and if they meet certain criteria, I want to retrieve the image stream data.
Yes.
And then send it up to the Photoshop API, process the image and retrieve it back, and then replace the image in the PDF.
Okay.
And that's an advanced use case, but that's the kind of use case I'm looking at.
Yeah, so you can get partially there, and there is also another question here that is related to that, and I will deal with that in an upcoming cafe because the question is too big. But I will bring it in here because it's the same question. If I could still, it was in French, that's why I'm having trouble. So the question was, can I use the result of a check inside of a JavaScript? And this comes very close to what you're saying, because what you could do is you could make a pre-flight check that gives me all the images that, that follow that certain criterion that you were talking about. And then you have a process plan step that wants to do something with those images. Yeah, that can be done. And in the short explanation, but I have a nice example that we'll do in an upcoming cafe, but the short explanation is that you have access to app.doc here, it starts here, app.doc results. And in a process plan where you do, if you run a profile or a fix-up or a check, anything that produces pre-flight results, those pre-flight results are stored in the app.doc result object. And so that means that in the next step in the process plan, I can start looking at those and do things with it. So yes, that part can be done. You could then use potentially the Photoshop API, or you could call the Photoshop API. What I can already tell you is that your approach will fail at that point because there is no way to get the image data out of the document with this JavaScript API anyway, and there is no way to replace it afterwards. So it will fail at that point, but the previous parts could be done.
When are the JavaScripts run? Are they run? Obviously, a doc result would be available after the profile had run. So are there certain times that the JavaScripts are run?
Yes, and it depends on where they are used. So when you run a profile, the startup script is run first. Yeah. And then it depends on what else is used. So in a profile, the variables that you have in this profile are evaluated after the startup script. And this is also important, and that's one of the limitations that I was talking about. They are run only once. If you use a variable somewhere, it is not that this variable is evaluated for every page, for example. Yeah. So remember this QR code thing. I have a script here, but this script is only going to be run once at the beginning of the profile run after the startup script. That will give pdfToolbox a value, and that value is then going to be used as it iterates over the pages and does its job. So there is no way in pdfToolbox at the moment to have a variable that is recalculated for every page. And that is something that is quite fundamental, and that would be really nice, because it would mean that if I want to add text and the text is different on every page, think page numbers or anything that goes in that direction, that I could use variables to do so. Right now, that's not possible. And you have to use, for example, a place content template, because there you do have that capability. Yeah. So in a profile, it is first a startup script, and then all the other variables are evaluated and filled in, and then the profile goes through all the steps. In a process plan, each step that includes scripts, those scripts are only evaluated when you get to that step. And that is necessary, of course, because you can have conditional processing in process plans. And the value of the variable, if you would calculate it at the beginning, might be different than when you calculate it after step number 5, for example. And there might be scripts that are in there that are never executed because the logic never executes that step. So in the process plan, it is dependent on when that step is executed.
Another use case would be like stamping page numbers or check numbers or something like that on each page. So you'd like to iterate over all the pages, changing the values?
Yeah, so, and that is not, yes, exactly, and that is not possible. So, well, it is possible, but you have to do it with place content. And the reason it's possible in place content is because place content uses an external, if you want, HTML templates. And there explicitly is a JavaScript function that you can use for the page loop. And that allows you to interfere with the page loop and to modify parts of the HTML for each page as you go through it. Yeah? But inside of pdfToolbox, with all the things that do something to the document, variables are only executed once. Yeah?
Does Toolbox take advantage of multiple cores? Is there any simultaneous processing?
Not for this. So yes, it does take advantage of multiple cores, but for multiple PDF documents. PDF documents can be run in parallel, but one PDF document is always going to be handled with one core.
So if I need to downsample 1,000 images in a single PDF, it's going to do them one by one?
Oh yes. Downsampling is overrated anyway. Yeah, so that is one of the significant limitations that you have, and it is because when those JavaScript variables are executed, and the fact that they're only executed or evaluated once in an execution context.
And maybe as a future request, have the option of when they should be recalculated. So
it is already a feature request. Don't let me stop you from making it an official feature request with Callus, then we'll happily add your voice to the others. The more voices I have for one, the more chance we have of getting it.
So just a little background, we actually wrote a prototype 5 or 6 years ago that did something similar. We called it PDF Commander. And so we wrote a bunch of use cases on using JavaScript during PDF processing. So if you want to see some of the examples we did, I'll be happy to show you offline.
Okay, cool.
We never made it a product, but it was an interesting thing. We actually used it for our PDFA validator quite a while ago.
Yeah. it's one of the things that we see with this as well. When this was released, we really thought at some point that what was going to happen is that people would write small JavaScripts here and there to do a calculation of two values or stuff like that. In the end, you see that people go way further than that. So continuously, people start pushing against the boundaries of what is possible with this inside of pdfToolbox. But yeah, so let me, and then we can see if there are any other questions, but let me show you one last thing just to make sure that you understand that that is possible as well. Last week, what I said is that these simple variables like num pages, that these can also be used in the description of a check. So instead of saying incorrect number of pages, I could say document doesn't contain pages, and then I could insert that variable in there. Yeah, and you can see that the default value is used for that variable. And now when I say analyze, it is going to ask me the number of pages, and if I make it 16, it's going to fail, and it says document doesn't contain 16 pages. Yeah? And this is of course cool because that's an error message that is much better than saying document doesn't contain the correct number of pages, but it is still a little bit, well, it can still be better, because what would be nice is if I could say how many pages there are in the document and what it should be. Yeah, so I could say document contains X pages and should contain, and then we have what we check against. Now, the problem, of course, is that this is a variable number. I don't know how many pages the document I'm checking will have. That's exactly the problem. And what I want you to understand, or make sure that you understand as well, is that I can use simple variables in this name. I can also use JavaScript variables. So I could create a new script, and then we'll call this script number of pages, for example. And that will give me the number of pages in the document. And again, because my memory is not so good anymore, I'm just going to look it up. And then you can see that there is something called app.doc.numPages that kind of feels like what I need. And I'm just going to return that. And what I do is correct, because my result window shows me that the result for this document is 2, which happens to be correct. So say, okay. And what you can see is that it inserts that script variable into the name of the check. It is a script variable because it has a different notation there, as you can see from the simple variable. And when I close that, now it does something a little bit strange, because now it says document contains 0 pages and should contain 4. Now, remember that scripts are normally executed in an execution context where there exists a document. Now, this check lives in the library with all of the checks. There is no current document at this particular point. The document context only exists when I hit analyze and I start processing it. Yeah, so it doesn't have a value, and what it does here is it simply returns 0. Yeah, because this app.doc.numPages is probably internally not defined or not set up properly, so I end up with 0. So this looks weird as an error message, but if I run it and I say 16 again, now it says document contains 2 pages and should contain 16, which is a pretty good error message. Of course, you could state it differently if you want, but now it shows me both what is expected, and it shows me what the actual state of the document is. Now, this is only possible in those cases where the JavaScript object, the doc object, can get you the information that you want. So, for example, number of pages. Another very popular one is the size of the trim box, for example. Yeah, but only for those cases where you can get the actual information from the document. But in those cases, you can use that to write a very good error message in the pre-flight report. And remember that what you see here is also what is going to be written out in the pre-flight report. So you can use scripting to completely customize the error messages in the pre-flight report as well. Okay, and that means that you could actually have an empty error message here in the overview if you want, and construct a message you want in the pre-flight report using a bit of JavaScript that you run in the name of the check or in the name of the fix-up. That is entirely possible. Okay, any questions that we haven't answered yet? I don't think so. For those of you who were here from the very beginning, I will share Stefan's results that say that Hong Kong is further away from Brussels, at least, than Los Angeles. But if you go to Thailand, you win. You're right. Accessing errors. Cedric, I am not sure. Yes, but that's what Luc, that's what I already talked about with the results section. Now, okay, so I have written a profile that we'll use in an upcoming cafe to talk about this. But I'll give you a little challenge, and you can see if you get to implement it using JavaScript inside of here. And then I'll explain, for those of you who don't feel like challenges, I will explain in the next cafe. So what I said is, in this JavaScript object stuff, you have the result object. And the result object is filled in by pdfToolbox each time a profile or a check or a fix is run. Yeah. So if I make a process plan, in theory and in practice, I can run a check, and then I could have a script in a later process plan step that does something with the results that come from that check. So the challenge I'm setting out here for those of you who want to play is make a process plan that decides which pages at the end of a document are empty, and that then removes only those empty pages. Yes, so I will say that again, and I will actually reformulate it on the Facebook group afterwards as well, so you can read it there. But so the challenge is, if I have PDF documents, and I know that the PDF document typically has a number of pages that are not empty or empty, but I know that at the end of the document, I could have a series of empty pages, and I want to remove the empty pages from the end of the document. That means if it's a book, not the empty pages in between chapters, but only the ones at the end of the document. And yes, you can do something. You can actually do that. I've done it slightly more complex than that, so it can be done, and it can be done using a process plan. Yeah. So let that be a challenge for the upcoming week. And like I said, I will put it in the Facebook group as well, so it is clear. If you think you have an answer, feel free to also post it in the cafe. and I will check whether it follows the rules, and I will think what the prize will be for the first one who gives me a working version of that. I'm thinking Belgian chocolate at the moment. So you don't have to play, Stefan, because of course Swiss chocolate is much better, but. Okay, any more questions, or shall we call this a day and go have a drink in the sun?
Thank you, David.
Yep. Have fun, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.